Mr. Bicek, can we read the Open Public Meetings Act statement? Yes.
Yes. The New Jersey Open Publics Meeting Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the Richfield Park Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, place, therefore posted in the Bergen Record, Star Ledger, Municipal Building, Board of Education offices, and district website. Public participation will be conducted both in person and virtually through Zoom. All public will be muted throughout the meeting. Public participation comments are limited to 5 minutes. The public will be able to both speak and be seen by the board when participating virtually or telephonically via Zoom. Individuals participating virtually that wish to make comments during the public participation will need to raise their hands by clicking the blue hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. Individuals participating by telephone that wish to make comments during the public participation will need to hit *9 on their telephone to raise their hand. The business administrator, board secretary will then unmute individuals one at a time to speak in order that their hand was raised.
Thank you. May I please have a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Cathcart. Mr. Cooney. Present. Ms. Kraft.
Here.
Mr. Feitros. Mr. Gomes.
Here.
Ms. McNeil.
Here.
Ms. Rodriguez.
Here.
Ms. Velez.
Here.
Ms. Orth.
Here.
President Martinez.
Here. Quorum. The only agenda item for tonight is development of board goals and discussion of district goals for the upcoming year. The board will conduct a self-evaluation of how well we met these goals in late spring, early summer of 2024. We will now open up to citizens' comments on agenda. Trustee Berlinda, could you read the rules? Take time.
Hi there. Just a moment.
For tonight's meeting,
Like this.
there will be one public comment session. There is a sign-up sheet on the podium. We'll call your name in the order that you sign in. Each member of the public will have 5 minutes to speak during each comment period. This cannot be transferred to other individuals. The public comment period will be 1 hour. The board will now entertain public comment. Please remember to state your name, Richfield Park mailing address, and to keep your comments brief to allow sufficient time for other members of the public to speak if they wish. Thank you for your cooperation and support.
Thank you. Do we have anybody to elevate since there's no one here present? And the portal is open for people to ask questions. Okay. Okay, I guess I will close public comments. As we close public comments, I'd like to thank all of you for your comments over the many years that I've been on the board, and especially over the past 10 months while I've been board president. It's my sincere hope and belief that the public, our administration, and our learning community is beginning to believe that this district is truly turning around and headed in the right direction. It is also my sincere hope that the public is beginning to believe that while this board is far from perfect, it is uniformly focused on healing and moving this district forward. To my fellow trustees, as we continue to raise expectations for district staff and students, we need to raise expectations for ourselves as a governing body. Tonight, the board will engage in open discussions that will lead to the forming of board goals for the upcoming year. These goals are intended to make us a better governing body that supports the hard work of our administration, teachers, staff, and ultimately improve the education of our children. In the spring or early summer, the board will engage in a self-evaluation process where we will judge how well we did at meeting these goals. I can attest personally that Mr. Lee, who prefers to be called Matt, Our consultant from New Jersey School Boards has provided this board and myself, or me, with invaluable advice during my tenure here. We are truly in good hands tonight. And with that, Matt, I will hand over control of the meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez. Good evening, everyone. Glad to be back in Ridgefield Park once again, and happy to be walking you all through the goal setting process that we bring to many districts, in particular, myself as the Bergen County representative for the Jersey School Boards Association. I work closely with boards all throughout the spring and summer to help them develop goals, not only for the district in conjunction with their superintendent, but also for themselves as board members to increase their effectiveness as a governing body. So I'm going to walk you tonight through some of the foundational concepts around goal setting, especially drawing the distinction between board goals and district goals, because there is a difference there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the goals that the board had set for itself last year and the district as well. And just to get an assessment of where we progressed. And then finally, we're going to open it up to discussion of proposed district and board goals for the coming year. Any questions as we go through? Happy to entertain, no problem if we stop and clarify things. So, still works. Goal setting really is probably no surprise to you all, has a number of different objectives, a lot of which we have included on this slide here. I think the most important things are to make sure that we are all aligned in the vision of our efforts in the coming year, to establish some benchmarks for accountability, because the board obviously is an oversight body, and then to also keep in mind this concept of continuous improvement. We set goals, we assess how we did in reaching those goals, and then we set higher goals in the coming year, and that's how we achieve continuous improvement. We like to talk about goal setting as being part of a system, right? And this is how we effectuate that continuous improvement dynamic in the district. And the next slide really demonstrates how this is a very cyclical process, starting in the upper left-hand corner, there's no corner on a circle, is there? Well, upper left-hand quadrant, if you will. We have the goal setting process, which we're engaged in right now. And as Dr. Martinez alluded to earlier, this is something that we like to start in the spring and summer months. We're a little bit past that right now, but it's still obviously a worthwhile endeavor. The next piece is once we settle on goals, once the board works with the superintendent to define what we want to happen in the district, the superintendent goes ahead and puts together a plan on how we're going to get there. So there is a difference between the what and the how pieces of this. The next thing you see at 3 o'clock on that circle is the reporting out on progress. And you can see that we offer up a proposed schedule for that in our presentations, but it's not necessary that the board stick to those exact months. And in fact, I would encourage you to look at the reporting out piece in considering the nature of the goal itself. Right? So it may make sense not to report out every 3 months. It may be every other month, or it may be 2 times during the year. Just make it make sense so that we're all working effectively. At the bottom of this circle, you see the evaluation process. And this is a key component of the goal setting process, because as you know, 1/2 of the superintendent evaluation is actually judging the progress that the superintendent made on your district goals. So that's a very key part of it. The other piece that you'll see in regards to the evaluation, it sits at 9 o'clock on that circle, and that is the board self-evaluation. And this is very much a parallel process to the CSA evaluation. It's where you take stock of how you did against your board goals and how you're working together as a governance team. And once again, with that concept of continuous improvement, looking at the ways that we move ourselves to the next level. And then the cycle starts all over again. We do very much encourage the consideration of data as we go through the goal setting process. Obviously, that provides some objective standards that we can consider, and it provides a framework for considering metrics for improvement. So there are a number of different data points that are presented to the board across the course of a year, and you see a lot of them represented on this slide, and you will see some on the next slide as well. So as you are considering the information that is given to you by your administration going throughout the course of the year, begin to think of those in the context of how is it we're going to improve some of these things going forward, and do they rise to the level of a district goal in the coming year? And keep your notes on your agenda or in another file so that when it comes to goal setting time, we're not just looking at sort of a blank canvas, but we're looking at a lot of things that we've considered over the course of time and things that we know are relevant from the data we've been presented. So I'll move past this. This is a second set of data sources. And now we're going to talk about how we develop goals. And I believe that Dr. Martinez has forwarded this slide to all the board already, but I just want to go over it very quickly because it does draw the distinction between what district goals look like and what board goals look like. The blue sphere that you see there contains the areas that district goals typically revolve around. And the yellow sphere is what board goals typically revolve around. And as you can see, the district goals are about those things that happen every single day in your school district, right? These are the operational aspects of running a school district. They are program and instruction, their PD, their staff development and retention and hiring and facilities, finance, all of those things are the prime areas for formulating district goals. In contrast, the yellow sphere contains board goals, and board goals are about the processes and procedures that are owned by the board. And if you think about it in a very simple way, if the board can effectuate progress on those goals on its own without having the administration play a major role in that, that's usually an appropriate board goal, right? It's all about those things that are your responsibility. And your responsibilities revolve around policy, they revolve around planning and strategic thinking, and they revolve around oversight and appraisal, right? So those are the things you want to try and improve with a board goal.
Matt,
Yes.
can you repeat that part again? The first part of that sentence? If
Which
it's-
one? I've been
if
rambling
it's-
crazy.
If it's something that we don't need the administration to help us with,
Yes.
then it's a board goal.
Yeah. So that's a way of sort of understanding that the board is responsible for improvement in those areas. So it's not to say that if you chose a board goal revolving around policy, for example, that you wouldn't bring your superintendent and perhaps your BA into those discussions, but you would recognize that the responsibility for making progress on those lies with the board, right? You're the policy-making body of this district. And of course, you never want to do anything without bringing your administrators into at least consideration, if not participation, but understanding that this is the board's thing to own and to move forward.
And so conversely, if it's something that we need the administration to execute, then it's probably not a board goal. We're dipping into district goals.
Correct. Yep.
So,
And, oh, sorry, I saw another hand somewhere. Yeah.
so board goals, can there be a board goal that revolves around committee meetings? The
Sure.
Committees?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's speaking to the way that the board operates as a governance team, right? So yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Is all that pretty clear so far? Yeah, great. The next thing that I want to draw your attention to on this slide is the language that you see at the top of the slide on the right. District goals are set collaboratively with the superintendent, okay? And each of those two stakeholders supplies a certain part of the district goal setting process. The board would never want to set district goals in a vacuum. You would always want to have the input of your chief education officer in helping to define, if you will, what are the things that are going to have the most dramatic impact on your teaching and learning activities in the district, and also, of course, facilities and things that might have, pressing needs. But taking in that information, it's up for the board to decide what are the outcomes that we're looking for? What's the what that we're hoping to happen over the next 12 months? The Board of Education, once it establishes those goals, also commits to giving the superintendent the resources to make those things happen, right? And that's all part of that discussion with the superintendent about what's feasible to do with our budget, what's going to be achievable, et cetera, et cetera. You've all heard of SMART goals. We'll talk about that as well. So once the what is defined in establishing those district goals, then the superintendent supplies the how. And the how takes the form of what we call an action plan. The action plan does sort of a line item accounting of how it is that we're going to get to that, what programs we're going to implement, what PD we want to bring in, what tactics we're going to be using. And then all of those in an action plan are accompanied by the relevant information that helps you understand how those are going to be established and effectuated. So you have the resources that are going to be needed. You have the timeline. You have the metrics for success. And those are all part of a good action plan so that you understand how it is a superintendent is going to approach achieving these things. Yes, Ms. Rodriguez. Yeah. Did you have your hand up?
You're referring to district goals, right?
District goals,
Okay.
correct. Yes, sir.
So would you say the district goals are more driven by the superintendent in collaboration with the board, or is it kind of a partnership outright?
It's definitely a partnership. This is the first time I'm meeting you. You should know that I was a board member for 20 years and I've been doing this for 7 years. I would never dream of setting district goals without having, substantial input from the superintendent as to what are the things that, really are going to make a difference in education in our district every day. So truly teamwork, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then that action plan is brought back to the board, not necessarily for tinkering, but for an understanding of what the approach is going to be, what are the milestones we should be looking for, because that's important to the oversight function of the board. You should know what it is to be looking for to ensure that progress is being made, right? That's pretty good. Everybody's good with the way district goals work. Awesome. Board goals, again, are about processes and procedures owned by the board. Wonderful example from Ms. Rodriguez on looking at our committee system. Is it helping us do the work of the board in a more effective and efficient way? If it's not, what can we do to improve it? We talked about policy. That's a function that the board owns. That may be fertile ground for a goal this year. I'm not sure where your policies are at. You exercised an excellent board goal last year. You found yourselves a new superintendent. That's something only the board can do, right? So that would have been a very good and appropriate board goal. I don't want to leave this too quickly, but I think we're pretty much on board with the differences here, yeah? Awesome. Okay. Everything good there? Just gonna flip my batteries. Having a little clicker malfunction. Should be back in a second. just advance to the next one? Thanks. Especially with boards that haven't gone through this process before, it's important to understand what stakeholders' roles are in formulating education goals. And the way we did this was we broke down the major stakeholder groups. We have your community, we have your board, we have the superintendent and administration, and then we have your educators. And as you can see, each of them have something to contribute to the process, but it's very much in line with what their exposure is to what happens each day in the educational process. You see on the community level, it's fair to say that most people in your community aren't educational experts, but they do have certain priorities and values and aspirations for the educational program in the community that they would like to see realized. So that is where the board, as the next stakeholder group, draws its, sort of direction from. The board is then responsible for narrowing that down into specific areas of focus, given that they have a much sort of closer view of what's going on in the district day to day. They also are responsible for supplying the resources, as we discussed before, through the budgeting process. And they are also responsible for appraising the progress on those goals and the performance of the superintendent in realizing them. The next level down you see is the superintendent and his or her team. And that is the level at which we see the how realized through those action plans and defining the programs and the tactics and applying those resources dedicated by the board. And down at the bottom, you kind of see where the rubber hits the road. That's your educators and the way instruction is delivered in the classroom in pursuit of those goals, the assessment of students, and finally, the adaptation and personalization of instruction. Let me try this one more time. There we go. Got it working. So I threw up there right now a bit of an overlay, and the overlay shows you the components of what we classically understand as a SMART goal, right? This is to kind of clarify for folks who come from the business world and are used to a different construct for SMART goals than we find in the educational world. Typically in a corporate setting, you are going to set your goals, and then you're going to plan on how to realize them, and then you're going to go out and do the work to realize them. Given that the responsibilities in a school district are split up differently, it happens differently in a school setting, right? So you can see that achievable, relevant, and time-bound piece sits right between the board and the superintendent. That's the collaboration we're having right now, right? We're deciding what's achievable, and that's why it's very important to bring your superintendent into those discussions. We're deciding that they're relevant for the things that we want to happen in the coming 12 months. And then we're looking at it from a year time frame, right? So that's your achievable, relevant, time-bound piece. Then the specific and measurable piece is outlined in your superintendent's action plan. That's how are we going to achieve these things? And what is it we're going to be looking at to ensure we're making progress? So SMART goals are very relevant in an educational setting. It's just we have different responsibilities than we might if we were working in a company. Does that all make sense? Okay, great. So the next overlay is the settings in which these stakeholder groups can contribute to the goals, right? So we look at the top with the community. Obviously, there's the voting booth. They have a say there. You may have public meetings in your district to talk about certain priorities within the district. There could be a strategic planning process. You might have some kind of public forum, or there might to just kind of get the sense of what the community is thinking. With the board, of course, in their work in committee meetings, in their to achieve those things that we see on the right-hand side of the slide. On the next level, you see the superintendent. They're working with their meetings, they're working their curriculum meetings and their planning meetings to make sure that they're aligning those tactics, those program resources to the goals that the board has set. And lastly, but not least, the educators are fulfilling their part of this responsibility within the instructional settings in the district. All make sense? Outstanding. Okay, so when it comes to district goal development, some of the things that we want to look at are our vision and mission. That's kind of where we define what it is that we're hoping to achieve in this district. Potentially a strategic plan if one is in place. Are there chunks of that that we want to bite off in the coming 12 months to work towards a long-term vision? Obviously, the data that we talked about a little bit earlier. And then one of the other things that we typically consider is what are the things that we achieved and our successes for us, and what are the things that we may have gotten a start on because, I don't know, a worldwide pandemic came around or something. And what are the things that we just didn't get to because we're doing too many other things and they need a priority still going forward. And that may be something we want to consider for a goal in the future. Yes.
Sorry, going
problem.
back to, we do have a policy for student representation at a board meeting. One thing that we're kind of missing is when you said surveys and things like that, student input. So where is that? Are they part of the committee or
Sure.
where are they?
Sure. I have to tell you that slides developed before student representatives were required on boards. And you could consider them right now part of the board discussion as well, but they certainly would fit in either community or board. So at this point, I'm going to throw up a couple of questions. We've obviously talked about most of this already, but what are the things that are going to most dramatically impact student learning? And where is it our talent and resources should be focused in order to develop the skills that we see up there, defined as those 21st century skills? Yeah. Okay. Here's our mission statement. Yeah. Just a refresher. Let us know what we're all about here in Richfield Park. And then we have our previous year's goals. And for this, typically, all we're looking for is just an assessment. Did we achieve those? If they're achieved, great, win. If they didn't, how far did we get? We got a great start, but we didn't complete. We got a bit of a slow start, and we may want to consider moving forward. So for a bit of assessment. Again, we don't spend too much time on this, it's just kind of a refresher.
So I guess
Sorry.
I'm assuming all the board members have the last year's board goals up. So we can spend a couple of minutes discussing how we're doing now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the board goals.
These are district.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No problem.
I would say that we partially achieved these goals. I mean, we're certainly doing the early childhood program that's up and running and going into the second year.
Okay, great.
College and career readiness, I think we are pretty much the same. So I don't think we've really expanded or haven't added any new programs to that. That's certainly something I'd like to see us pick up back and move forward. And I think we're moving in a good direction, knowing all students. Partially achieve the goal.
Is that a fair assessment from the rest of the board?
I agree with regards to the very loose implementation of the preschool program. I think that we're certainly ahead of where we were last year. I'm not quite sure how we would measure the first goal as far as like getting to know all the students and building a support. I mean, I would probably need more data to say that that goal was achieved. Same with college and career readiness. Like, how do you measure that?
Well, I think the measurement would be component of the action plan. So if, for instance, one of the pieces, and I'm just making this up, were to, bring in professional development for all school teachers on what are the demands of today's workforce. Again, I just made that up. If that actually happened, that would be a component achieved.
But it says expand multiple plays. We did not expand that in bringing any new ones. So I would say we didn't even achieve that goal.
That's
So-
okay. I mean,
I would argue that it's hard for us to determine how much progress, some progress has been perhaps in all of these areas, but what didn't happen after the district goals were set was an action plan that would have spelled out how we were going to achieve these lofty goals that I have to read 2 or 3 times to even understand time, except for the last one. That one's pretty clear. But the others, you know, despite repeated action, asking for it, but on the board's part, we never received any kind of an action plan on any of these. So I don't know how we now measure any progress towards.
okay. So I do agree with you that ideally you would have had an action plan with a set of milestones that you could measure against. It sounds like though, at least anecdotally, you all understand that there was some movement made on all of these goals at some point. If I'm putting words in your mouth, let me know.
I think the one that's, the one that's most clear is early childhood, because that was tied to funding, tied to students. We know how many we had last year, how many we have this year. So it's a concrete program
Mhm.
that we could see advancement on. The other two, there were things that happened related to them, but as there's also a lot of change
Mhm.
in the district. So
Yes.
seeing that on a continuum really,
Okay.
and whether or not they belong independently as goals, the way they're written, I think is up for conversation.
Mhm.
1 and 3 and 2.
Would it be fair to say that maybe we should maybe add these along to next year's goals? I mean, now that we have a new superintendent, maybe give these maybe another year and reevaluate these as additional goals after another year's worth of, I mean, there's nobody to say that we can't reevaluate these after another year. If that makes any sense? I mean, I think that, another year's evaluating the early childhood learning and the college readiness. I mean, there's nobody to say that, with our new superintendent to reevaluate these goals in another year, I think would be maybe smart on our part to see where we are a year later with these same goals. I mean,
Nick?
obviously have new goals, but yes. I'm
I was
sorry.
going to say, having previewed some of Dr. Vespignani's district goals, I think, so first I agree with the board that if we've made progress on that, it hasn't been measured. It hasn't been something that we can really kind of move on from.
Mhm.
But having previewed some of Dr. V's district goals, I think these 3 goals are spoken to in the new district goals. So Nick,
Okay.
right on point, they are incorporated in the new district goals.
So
Fair
would it be fair as I'm sorry, it's a board member? Oh, okay. Would it be fair to just characterize each of these goals as some progress made, just as an overall assessment of them? Yeah, okay. All right.
I just want to make one more comment about the
Sure.
previous district goals. Because in re-listening to the link you sent out from last year, that was very helpful, thank you. And district goals, my understanding, they are broad for everyone in the district is supposed to be sort of aligned on those goals, right? It's not just a segment of the district. And the first one is clearly across all students, all.
Yeah.
The second one although it has long implications to the upper grades, it was very, very specific that there were few people who were charged with achieving that goal. And kind of the same thing for the third one, college and career readiness is pegged to the high school. So again, a segment of the population of our district is sort of responsible for delivering that goal as opposed to a broader total district involvement in achieving the goal.
So I don't believe premise that every goal has to touch every student is correct. In fact, in practice, I've almost never seen it that way because it's always picking out a point of emphasis for the coming year. And sometimes that does apply universally in the district. And sometimes it's just very much about a specific program, constituency, or even a thing. Like sometimes it's just, we're going to work to revamp the athletic facilities. And, I know all students might touch on that, but it might just be a high school athletic facility. So I don't think it's correct that every goal has to touch every student. So now that we've taken a look at last year's goals, when we do goal setting as a way to have the most productive meeting possible, we reach out to administration to essentially get a set of proposed goals as a jumping off point for discussion. So I did so in this instance as well, and Dr. V has submitted these. And I'm going to turn the meeting over to him now to have him walk us through those.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, and good evening, everyone. First, I think it's important to note that these are proposed and subject to change as a result of the conversation and dialogue that we have here this evening. But I first wanted to note that these goals have been developed in collaboration with my administrative team, and they're very much aligned with the board committee structure, either directly through F&P, personnel, and B&G, which you would see 1, 2, 3 are associated with that, but also more comprehensively with finance and policy. In terms of my interview process, I very much appreciated that the board was forthright and transparent in supplying the what. So for back to slide 8, they made it explicitly clear the that would need attention from me and from my team, which we have outlined here. Certainly open to additional conversation around these or other areas, but I found that to be very helpful. The timing is impeccable because I have just completed my first 90 days in the district. And as part of my in process, I had submitted and created a 90-day entry plan, which has now come to a conclusion. So this opportunity to provide the board with a briefing, which I'm doing through my proposal for my district goals. In terms of last year's goals, we see that they were somewhat very specific, and all 3 of those goals the board will see when I submit my action plan. Those 3 goals will be embedded in my first goal, increase student achievement and engagement. So you will see action items specifically speaking to those 3 areas. Wanted to just share some other items that would fall for consideration into that first goal. So we're working diligently to establish professional learning communities, commonly referred to as simply to create a focus on the learning of all students through data to inform instruction and increase student achievement. Reviewing and streamlining the intervention and referral process, including the documentation of referrals, action plans, and Tier 1 supports. In terms of the pre-K expansion, to provide high-quality professional learning opportunities in the areas of curriculum, instruction, assessment for our partnership providers, the successful implementation of the district's preschool program. Other examples would include the assessment of the current CTE and dual enrollment offerings to determine the areas that can be explored and expanded upon in an effort to provide our students with alternative career pathways. Another example would be to expand opportunities for family engagement, very much connected, as the research would tell us, to support increases in student achievement and engagement, to provide our families with opportunities and strategies to support learning through a parent guardian academy that we're launching this year through our Home and School Connection Committee. We do the second bucket and goal to streamline human resources operations. Some examples and action items would include rebranding the employment tab and application form within the district to reflect our desire and recruit and retain culturally responsive staff members. We spoke earlier about engaging students in this process. I'm working with the student government to draft questions to include in our online application program so that the students have a voice in the process. Looking to establish an organizational chart for the 23-24 school year that streamlines reporting lines, as we have had some new additions and new positions and new reporting lines by way of revised job descriptions most recently. To increase our presence at career fairs to recruit qualified and diverse candidates. Other action items may include creating a position control roster, commonly referred to as the PCR, to effectively coordinate staff and assignments in alignment with the budget. And moving on to goal 3, to enhance facility operations. Some examples may include creating spaces that support the social emotional needs of students, to engage in a comprehensive facility evaluation to ensure that there are equitable learning opportunities throughout the district, and also to evaluate athletic spaces to ensure safe and competitive facilities for our scholar athletes and programs. So again, these are things that my administrative team, I have developed in terms of an action plan, and a more comprehensive plan will be provided to the board, and certainly open to any conversation and thoughts for items that the board may wish to have included in district goals, understanding that, there are many areas in need of immediate improvement and also some strengths to build upon that the district is already doing well. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we would open up the discussion to the board. You've had previous conversations about some of these things already, and you've gotten some detailed explanations of the things that might sit underneath each of these goals. So I'm just going to throw it back to the board for any questions you may have or comments for Dr. Vespignani.
Dr. V, I'm very happy here even look to expand the CTE programs. With respect to goal number 2, having the students input with the hiring practices and what they're looking for, I'm hoping that for goal 1, maybe you can also survey and maybe families to see what type of CTEs they may be interested.
If I may, so yes, we've recently been engaging with the high school administration in terms of looking at that. So most recently, Ms. Trigley and I have met with Ms. Cavens and her team and specifically speaking about CTE. And one of the items that did come up was that very item, that it would be a good idea to canvass the student body to determine what are the areas that they may have interest in.
Thank you.
I like the construct of the goals and that we are rolling in our prior goals to continue on them, but sort of, to me, this feels a little bit like a back to basics, which I think the district needs. And I like the way that they're bucketed into these 3 separate goals.
Thank you. That's very much approach in terms of what we are providing with our staff, and that touches all areas, including curriculum and instruction. Very much going back to the basics, evaluating our processes, our programs and procedures, and very much going back to the fundamentals.
Any other input from the board?
I'm not sure if this is a, I'm going to be the first one to blur the line between board goals and district goals, just to test you.
Dr. Martinez.
I'm wondering on an ongoing basis, how can we as a board get better at being familiar with the district goals, like in an ongoing fashion, whether we review them monthly or something like that? Or can something be worked into the district goals that the board, and by extension, the community, is aware of the progress and shortfalls?
Yeah, so going back to the not a square circle, one of the components that sat at 3 o'clock was frequent updates on progress toward district goals. Now that can take many forms. It's a lot of work to do sort of a complete overview of them at every single board meeting, but as you guys work together in your committees, you will be considering all of those components that are going in there because, that's the way committees work, right? So I think it's incumbent upon the board to keep their eyes on the prize and understand that this is our focus and this is how we'll be evaluating our superintendent. So these things stay top of mind throughout the next 12 months. Some boards will actually take the step of reading out their district goals at the beginning of every single meeting. And that's another way to not only remind the board themselves of, what our priorities are, but also to let the public know we are watching these things. These are the things that are really important to us, and we know they're important to you, and we're thinking about them all the time. So that's just a couple of ways.
Matt, what you're saying about the 3 o'clock and this graph, it makes a lot of sense because reviewing it and reporting in November, and then also again in January, the possibility of there being a new board, you're being able to review with those new board members as well as they may hear it for the first time on their end.
Sure. I think it's a great idea to, bring everybody on the board to speed at one time with that January kind of update. But I would also encourage any new board members to make an appointment with Dr. V and your business administrator to get caught up on everything in the district. I mean, everybody remembers their first year on the board, right? You had it all nailed. It was easy, right? Yeah. You kind of need that sort of big giant orientation at the beginning just to get your bearings. So in addition to what you're saying, Brian, I would say absolutely get them in individually and walk them through. Hey, here's our goals. Here's where we are. Here's what the budget looks like. Here's the things you have to do at board meetings, what you can expect, what to do when you have questions, all those things. And in fact, if you don't have a formal orientation program for new board members, sounds like a good board goal.
Thanks, Matt.
I actually just went on to the New Jersey School Board Association. So there are certain trainings that were mandated
Yes.
to attend,
Mhm.
but there are optional training
Plenty.
too. There's additional training too. Which when I first came to the board, that's what I did.
Mhm.
You know,
The optional stuff.
the optional stuff.
Yeah. Listen, I was on a board for 20 years, okay? And when I got to this job and I saw boards from a horizontal view instead of a vertical view, boy, did I learn a lot, right? So as much training as you can do, I don't want to guarantee you, but I suspect you will learn something you didn't know before, even if you've been through that training before, right? There's always a little bit different nuance, a little bit different facet that you're looking at that can be helpful. And there's plenty of research to support the fact that boards who engage in training work in districts where students succeed. Converse, actually, students succeed because boards train together. The Iowa Lighthouse study, if you want to look it up. Okay, so if I'm getting the sense correctly from the board, this is a good set of goals that we want to move forward with. The expectation would be that Dr. V is going to come back to you with your action plan. And in fact, that's actually the next slide. So here's what happens. Your board is going to adopt these goals by resolution. My recommendation would be that you post them online and that the public should understand where it is you're going. And they also have a way to reference those and say, hey, how are we on these? And, it's a way to hold yourselves accountable as well. Your action plans will be brought back to the board for discussion. As I mentioned before, it only makes sense that if you're going to be providing the oversight function in the district, you should understand what are all the steps that are going to be taken. Now, that's not mean that you get to tinker with all that stuff, right? You can have discussions, you may alter them, but this is the superintendent's purview. The superintendent figures out how we do these things, okay? You're concentrating on outcomes. Are we getting to where we said we wanted to get to? And that's the standard for your evaluation. And then we talked about the progress reports already, so that's something that we want to establish early on as well. So that's district goals.
Matt, excuse me.
Yes,
Is
sir.
it appropriate for, I hate to use the word appropriate because inappropriate, but
Sure.
is it okay or encouraged for board members to make suggestions, specific suggestions on the action plan based on their prior knowledge, or is that blurring the line?
So the short answer is yeah. Okay. The longer answer is, what's the difference between a suggestion and a dictate? Right? So if I were going to talk to my superintendent about something that I thought might deserve some consideration, I would pose it in the form of a question, so it doesn't sound like a mandate, right? Because that's really out of your area, but it might be a valuable conversation. It just has to. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we talked about those and the distinction. And these are some of the questions we would ask ourselves as a board when we're going about considering what we want to do in the coming year. So we have, is there a professional development that we should engage in? I think we already talked about professional development is a pretty good thing. So whether or bring your attorney to do something or whatever, just keep learning, right? Keep that continuous improvement in the back of your mind. What professional development does our board self-evaluation indicate? We don't have that resource this year. Okay. You guys work together as a team now going on 9 months, going to 10 months. So I'm sure you've noticed things. You're all smart people. What are the things that we could do better, right? Might be our committees, might be something else. What professional development is in support of the board goals? This is an interesting one because if you remember back to those, the yellow and the blue spheres, there was a little bit of an overlap in that Venn diagram, right? That overlap might be things that you need to learn about in order to make the goals more understandable, more effective, enable you to contribute to it more. The example I typically will give to boards, because I think it's pretty understandable, is let's just say theoretically the district for a referendum, okay? There are aspects of that referendum that fall in the lap of the board. And one of them is taking out bonds to finance that referendum. So if you've never experienced that before, it might be a good thing for you to bring in bond counsel to talk to you about what this means and how it works and what the timing is like and things like that. That would be an example of getting some professional development on the board level that will help you make decisions against the district goal. Make sense? Yeah, okay. So, yeah.
Quick question. So for district goals, board and superintendent establish dates for frequent progress updates. Under the board goals, the second one says we'll do a self-evaluation. Do we need to do it more than once during the year?
No.
No?
No, it's typically done, as there's actually 2 schedules for it. The one I showed you in the square circle was it gets done in conjunction with the superintendent evaluation, okay? Superintendent evaluation is, the timeline is dictated by statute and code, right? It has to happen by July 1, okay? What typically happens, maybe it's just legacy practice or whatever, but you have these discussions around goal setting in spring and early summer. So it only makes sense if you're going to have discussions about both district and board goals to have those evaluations in front of you. So you understand what are the areas of concern or what are our strengths, so that when you look at those things, you can make better decisions about what goals you want to pursue, right? There's another camp, and this is largely since, of course, the elections were moved from April to November, is that if we have a board team that sits from January 2 or whatever through December 31, why don't we do our board self-evaluation in November or December, right? Because then we have 10, 11 months of working together, and maybe we want to do the evaluation that way. That doesn't really fall in with the goal-setting practice so much, but it doesn't necessarily have to either. So it's entirely up to the board for the board self-evaluation piece.
Thank you.
Questions? No? Okay. So that being said, these were some previous year's board goals that I believe you got an email from Dr. Martinez about very recently. If you want to fill in sort of the gaps around that, Mr. President.
I went back and watched the board goals meeting last year. And we never set formal written down board goals. And that's probably why I couldn't find them on email or any type of document that had our board goals. But I was able to pull them from the discussion in the room. And so I guess I'll just go through these real quickly. We spent a lot of time talking about communication. And in the three broad categories that I saw was between the board and the public. And you can see the smaller categories there about how we spoke to the public, how we responded around the rationale behind decisions. We also spoke about education in the board, whether it was the president to the rest of the board or between the committees. Many board members felt that these were privy to information that the rest of the board was not. And third, between the superintendent, it was felt that the board was not briefed early enough on the rationale behind certain decisions, whether it was in a meeting or in a full board meeting, and that there were too many walk-ins and not enough information on individual agenda items or the rationale behind them. So these were the three broad categories we spent most of the time on. And then towards the end of the meeting, we also spoke about strategic planning. There was concern about the population and what it meant to our school system, any demographic changes. Our district has in terms of demographics, the district has changed over the past 10 years very significantly. And also beginning to think about things like a referendum, expanding facilities for our pre-K programs, and also being more proactive about preparing for these changes that are coming down the road in our district.
Okay. Given that we went through this exercise with the district goals, I'm just going to throw it back to the board again to give us an assessment, just a brief capsule description of what progress we made or maybe not did make.
I think that we made a lot of progress on communication. I think that the regular readouts from the committees, the committee chairs to the rest of the board have been really helpful. Streamlined our meetings a little bit with the public comment and answering and the way that's being handled. So I think we did make progress on that. On strategic planning, I think we have a lot of opportunity.
I'd like
Anyone
to,
else?
I'd like to kind of piggyback off of Trustee McNeil about the communication. I think it's very important the way things are moving now with Dr. V and Mr. Beisig with our organization and planning our committee meetings. It's been very pleasant to have the schedule way ahead of time. I'm very thankful for that, and the two committees that I am on, I know well in advance not to plan anything. And excuse me, it's just it's a wonderful thing knowing that you can plan ahead, and you could plan your agenda, you can communicate, and then gives you plenty of time to get the committee reports back out to everyone else. And from my second go round on the board, excuse me, my second term, the first time around it was a lot different. So with the way President Martinez has broken everything up, I feel like we're in a very good place in terms of communication. So that's my 2 cents.
Great, outstanding. Anyone else?
I agree. I think these are communicating effectively. It's refreshing to have committee meetings that have a set agenda with input from the board. So thank you to Dr. V for being so specific and focused during our committee meetings. And I appreciate all of the trustees and the communications that they send on the committees that I'm not privy to. So I think the communication is certainly drastically improved.
Outstanding. So just to summarize, it sounds like we could characterize goal 1 as good progress made. Yeah. And number 2 is basically we've not made progress on that one. Yeah.
I agree. I don't think we've made progress on number 2, but we also, we made progress in terms of communicating with each other, but then also communicating with the public. I'm looking at number 1 between board and public, showing respect. In the past, I do see an improvement too, showing respect to public.
Great, great. Okay. All right. What are we going to do?
Anybody else?
So just,
yeah.
I was just thinking about, you gave us an example of if we were going to go for a referendum,
Yeah.
that could be some PD that we can participate in. And then thinking about our previous goals, we've made like no progress in the second one. Maybe a goal, a board goal to somehow incorporate that.
The strategic plan? Yeah. So I don't think that I would just set that goal tonight without having further discussion about how that fits into Dr. V's vision for the district at this point. If you're already in agreement as a board that we're going to do a strategic plan, great. But it's probably a bigger undertaking than you just want to kind of throw out there. But I'll open it up to the rest of the board. What's the thinking?
I was kind of thinking that to kind of get us onto track, to me, it makes the most sense to try and set board goals and then evaluate those board goals in the spring, despite the fact that our election is in November. And so I think that we should be looking for 3-ish goals here that really would be, that we could make significant progress in 6 months. And then maybe at that time in the spring, set a larger goal that would have a full year to kind of evaluate where we are on it. So looking more like getting back to basics, the way our district goals are, to just get us aligned to going through this process and doing it properly and kind of a reset. But that's just my thoughts on it.
I really like the idea board is support district goals. So I'm looking at page 9, that slide with those essential questions. What professional development is needed by the board in support of the district goals? So I think that whatever direction we decide to go in with regards to the board, I think should be supported by professional development in addition to the mandated trainings that we all have to receive. I think that we should do an additional learning as a team to help us support us with our goals. So I think professional development should be one of our board goals, and they should be dependent on the work that Dr. V is doing through the district goals, in addition to any of want to do as a board. Let's just say committees is one of them. How can we deepen our work through committees? Maybe we do, professional development to support that work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I like what Matt said earlier about onboarding for new board members. So maybe the board goal is just a little bit broader about the education of the board, right?
Yeah,
Like not only just the
Like an orientation, right?
APD
Like an
topic,
orientation
the
of the board.
onboarding piece, like just sort of
Almost like
have-
a 90-day entry plan for new board members, right?
Right.
The same way that we hold, the superintendent for that, but like you should be doing X, Y, and Z, this type of learning, meet with the superintendent, meet with a board member, understand what the role of a committee is, because I think we all entered the board on our first year and then went for our first, like, okay, like you kind of learn as you go, but I think we should top load the PD.
And it could be catered towards our district too, which is something that the first time around, deer in headlights completely. And, you know, you can go on the website and see, read all you want, but when you find something that's more catered towards our district, it makes more sense to me, in my opinion.
There was one,
So I'm hearing PD for the board.
Well, I
Regardless
like
of what's-
Diane's, trustee version of it better, like education for the board, which
Right.
encompass PD, but then it's like a whole, like a menu of things.
Like processes and protocols.
Okay.
the other,
Just keep in mind that the expectation is going to be that the board president or his or her designee will develop an action plan very similar to what the superintendent develops for district goals. Once again, in order to, define those milestones that we're going to be looking for and to be able to report out on progress. So,
I do want to bring up just a couple of other things that I have been thinking of. And I know what we just said, that like the long-range facility plan and the strategic plan for our properties is probably something we don't want to tackle yet, but we absolutely have to have that on our radar, especially with our sending district. You know, I typically take Route 80, and I took Route 46 home the other day, the new construction there. Trustee Cathcart continues to talk about upcoming construction in the village, but this whole construction happening in Little Fair, and they send to us. So the long-range facility plan and what we need to look at, it's not a board goal that we can,
Yeah, is that a district goal?
I think that's a board goal, isn't it? To like ensure we have the right facilities, and we, obviously, you're not gonna do it in 6 months, but starting to understand what it is we need to do, I think is important.
Yeah, that actually is one of those things that could sit on the fence, right? Because the board's responsibility is to help craft the long-term strategic vision for the district, which is literally what a long-range facilities plan is about. But there has to be significant input on the administrative side because it's going to have to address all of the educational, athletic, extracurricular, et cetera, needs of the district. And if that's something that the board and the administration choose to tackle this year, I would recommend that, I don't think it matters which bucket you put it in, but everybody has to be heavily involved in that.
I also was thinking about policy. In my second stint on the board as well, and I don't know if we've really taken a look at all of our policies. I think that as they come up through stress estimate, we look at them. I know the policy committee does great work. Brilliantly, you've done miracles on that committee. But I think that taking a look at all of our governing policies and tackling them, I think is a big undertaking, but I think them with fresh eyes and having conversations about how we govern, I think is important.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thinking about, new board members, and I think like the 90-day action plan is great, for new board members. But also one thing that helped me as a new board member, my first year, was being on the policy committee. I literally printed out all the policies, I highlighted it, and we were not adhering to policy at all. So, and there's a lot of policies that we're not adhering to. So we have to look at policy. So maybe having a goal, specifically targeting to policy.
When you say we're not, who's the we? Is it board, district, everybody, all the people?
Well, one of the policy was student representation. So even between November election and January, that's when I was looking at the policy. So that was the first policy. I was like, well, where is the student representation? So I sent that information in the policy. So the board, I wasn't on the board at that time, but I was it was after the election. So the board at that time was not having student representation.
Berlinda.
So the board and also other members.
So I think there's two issues there. One is, do we need to do a refresh of our policies, which is something I think we've talked about a little bit, and we can outsource to school boards or something like that, is looking at the policy. But are you talking about the way our meetings are run, like that policy? The procedures of our board meetings?
Well,
The district?
I was making reference to that policy of student representation. There was no student representation, and that there's a policy. So we were not adhering to that policy.
How old was that policy? Because the requirement to have a student representation on the board is less than a year old. There was allowance for student representation on the board, but it wasn't required in years past. Now it's required.
But it wasn't our policy. But I just want to kind of broaden the discussion a little bit, because there were a lot of things that the majority of the district is following policy and procedure, of course. But there were things that we were supposed to do on the board self-evaluation being one of them, setting goals being that we weren't keeping to the timeline on the calendar, and we weren't doing it in the meeting. So I think what I'm hearing is shoring up our own and making sure that we're following our own board. I'm here? Okay.
So
And
just to be clear, there's a section of your policy manual called bylaws. Bylaws are the rules that the board adopts for running itself. It sounds like that's where we're going, but I'm not sure that's what you intended, Ms. Rodriguez. Am I wrong?
I was referring to policies.
Okay. So couple things about policy. First of all, I commend you for reading all your policies. Good job. I know from when I started a million years ago, they were all in paper, and there was 2 volumes this big. So I think the board needs to recognize that this is not something you accomplish in the space of a year, okay? When boards do adopt a policy goal, generally speaking, they're looking at a single series, okay? At most, because it is a lot of work. So you might want to consider this going to be a multi-year goal. You also might want to select certain series that are most relevant to the things that you want to review. And understand also that the board will not do this in a vacuum. You will need Dr. V and Mr. Beisig's input on some of this stuff as well. So consider the fact that reviewing policy is a considerable task. So just those words of caution from somebody who's been down this road.
So
Thank you.
I like what you said about the bylaws, and we talked about the board education, and I think that, understanding the bylaws, the professional development for whatever it is we choose to have it on, and the onboarding kind of fit under there. We also sit under a state monitor. And I think that it's really important that we understand what that means, where it's for. I know there's the financial, it also has to approve that we are functioning well. And we need his feedback to understand where we are and where we aren't, to sort of guide us on how do we see the path forward to be an independent board running our district. And to me, that's a really important one, the feedback and the finances that go with it. And last thing that I'm going to say is our mission statement. I don't know where that responsibility lies, but if if one person can stand up and that statement, I would be impressed. Because it's paragraphs. And I think to set the direction for the district, we need to have a clear mission.
That might be our goal, is to create a new mission statement. And I agree with you. Brevity is your friend.
I think you're right. I think the whole policy might be, to say we're going to review all policy is
Never happened.
not going to happen. But I do think that we could start with the bylaws,
Sure.
right? Because we're trying to get back to basics here a little bit. It's my feeling anyway. And so we should know that our bylaws are what we're doing, what we want to be doing, that it doesn't say something that that we don't think works for whatever reason. So maybe just doing the bylaws and taking a look at those and making certain that as a board, we're operating correctly and the way that that we believe is the most efficient and most appropriate for this board at this point.
But couldn't we fold that into that first goal that we spoke about education of the board with professional development? Like, wouldn't that be like a sub bullet of like professional development, right? Like understanding our bylaws, could we tuck that in there?
Yes, but I think I'd be more interested, not just in understanding the bylaws, but in deciding whether those bylaws are appropriate. So, because I'm sure no one's looked at them if no one's looked at our mission statement in 10 plus years, certainly has looked at our bylaws in 10 plus years, I would say, except for Linda, who printed
Linda
them
has,
out.
yes. But
In personal opinion here.
My thing is, okay, we have policies. We're not adhering to policies. So then what's the point of having the policy? Because that causes confusion.
So if you mean that the board is not adhering to policies, generally speaking, what they do is reflected in bylaws, okay? If the district is not adhering to policy, that's a discussion with your superintendent, because your superintendent is responsible for implementation of policy. Okay, it's not a board thing. So set the direction, leave it to your chief education officer, and just monitor it.
And I think in terms of board goals, I think we need to clean our own house with what I hear you saying, Belinda. And, some of the policies are reviewed as they go on. Like I said, we can order a policy review by an outside agency, but it's our bylaws and how we can, on the board, we can target in the short run. So I wrote that down.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of splits, right? So define a specific task. Even if you have to make a second goal to accomplish the thing you want, let's make it clear. Let's not make it, it's just a checklist essentially. Just my opinion.
What I'm hearing loud and clear is that I don't know how we start on any of these other goals if our bylaws and how we conduct business is not in order. So I think we do need to have a refresh and prioritize that as maybe it's part of the education. If we're not going to start with bylaws, we really can't, we're not going to pass go. So we should make sure that we're conducting meetings and subcommittees and adhering to the rules as written, or that we need to change the bylaws if we need to change them. I hear that as something that's one that we have to start with. So the two that I'm hearing very loudly are bylaws, everybody understanding the bylaws, and two is improving our education with our new board members as well as existing board members.
I think I have those reflected, and I wrote down, the way I wrote them down was to create a 90-day orientation program for new board members, which coincidentally now complies with the mandatory training requirement that has to happen within 90 days of your first meeting or first being sworn in. So I think that's great. The next one I wrote down was to engage in PD in support of district goals with programs to be determined. And the last one I have is to review the bylaws. Does that capture everything, Dr. Martinez?
That's what I'm hearing sifting to the top.
Are we also going to consider this mission statement as a goal?
It's up to the board.
I think that's a really realistic one and much needed because every time I look at it, it is overwhelming and more verbose than I am.
As a side note, Matt, is that
Yeah.
something that New Jersey school boards can help guide us with?
Yes.
Revising the mission statement
Yes.
in a session similar to this, I assume?
Yes.
Awesome.
So no,
No, this is.
4 goals?
yeah. You can do it.
Yeah, this seems realistic.
We recommend 3 to 5. In fact, if you look at our superintendent evaluation tool, it has room for 5 goals.
How do we, what trustee Orth said, how do we make it that we evaluate ourselves in the spring? Because I think it's fair that Dr. V and his team need some time under their belt before we embark on that long-range facilities plan.
Mhm.
And I also don't want to lose sight of we operate under a state monitor and we should know what his feedback is so that when we have gotten to the point where we are no longer in trouble, we are also on solid footing.
Sure. There's nothing to stop you from pursuing other goals, right? So you want to have sort of a landscape view of what's going on with the state monitor, have that conversation. I don't know if you would do it in committee or you do it full board, but nothing to stop you from doing that. The long-range facilities plan, again, just like a strategic plan, I think you have to have a lot more discussion about the ramifications of beginning those projects because they're considerable in both instances. And if I'm reading from discussion here tonight correctly, we're kind of resetting here. And you may want to get on a little bit more solid footing before you start to bite off big chunks like that.
I agree. I think what I'm saying is, at what point do we say, when are we going to look at our board goals again? And is it the November evaluation or is it the spring evaluation?
Do you mean
of
district
goals?
or board?
Board.
So I think we'll come up with the board goals, the formal board goals today, but Michelle's handwriting is much better than mine. So we're gonna have all the comments that we made today. I'll probably look at this again because I nerd out like that. And I will share all the ideas that were put out today because I think these are all goals for us individually and as a district. But the formal board goals will be these 4 or 5 that we come up with. And then these others are also going to be on the menu because they have to be done. So I don't want us to lose sight of these other ones, is what I'm saying.
And just to be clear, once again, the fact that you don't set a strategic plan or long-range facilities plan as a goal this year doesn't mean you can't have conversations against those topics. If you have concerns, talk about them.
So,
But sorry?
can that be a district goal?
No, it's just conversation.
That could be committee, that could be committee goal. There can be a committee that takes on the facilities discussion and begins that discussion in committee. There's nothing to stop us from addressing all these issues
Mhm.
in committee or individually or collectively or with the public or having a public forum. We can do all those things. But for the in-house, what are we going to do to be a better governing board? We have these goals.
Okay. So I think I have our list. It's what I read out before, plus the piece about, and I want to get this right, you're going to create a new mission statement, not revise your old one, right? Okay, good. So Very similar to what we saw before with the what we saw with the district goals. We're going to do virtually the same thing. We're going to develop an action plan around that, adopt these goals and publish them just as you would your district goals, and establish that reporting out timeframe, whatever that might be. And then, come evaluation time next year, you guys will evaluate your progress on these and start to think about them the next cycle. Yeah. Okay. What I typically do, as I mentioned to Dr. V and Dr. Martinez before, was I'll go back and turn all my scribblies into actual typing and send them to you as a recap of tonight's meeting, along with a few attachments that will help, like we have a template for an action plan, for example. From there, you guys, if you have questions, certainly reach out. If you want to schedule other sessions, certainly reach out as well. Keep in mind that when these come back to you, they're not written in stone. If you want to, play with the language a little bit, maybe I didn't quite capture exactly what you meant, feel free to do so. We always characterize them as draft goals. So, this is the board's document, the board's goals. Just feel free to do that.
I'm sorry, I hate the question right after we wrap things up, but is it, because Dr. V and Mr. Bisick have been very quiet, is that typically appropriate? They typically put input into, or should we be asking for input, like on the board goals, or strictly they just?
So just a little bit of history you probably didn't need. This was approached a little bit differently before the pandemic. So most of the time I would come in here and the conversation would begin about goals for next year, okay? What we found doing virtual meetings during the pandemic was that it's just way too sloppy when you're trying to do that on, with 12 or whatever people on a screen. So at that point, I started to ask superintendents, give me a menu, give me a set of draft goals. And not surprisingly, the draft goals were almost always on target. Why? Because these are the conversations you're having all year long. Your priorities are not a secret, right? So to my mind, the sort of, I wouldn't call it a larger role, but the more voluminous role maybe that a superintendent would have taken at this meeting has been taken already. You got the goals and you got the explanation of the goals.
No, I didn't mean for the district goals. I meant
for the board
for
goals.
the board goals. Like, is it appropriate for them to have input into, do they think that our board goals are realistic or appropriate or?
Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the sort of litmus tests for board goals is, can we do this largely on our own, right? So can you do a mission statement on your own? Yeah, I don't see why not. You're pretty smart people. Should you get Dr. V's input? Sure. You may even want to go out to the student body and say, what do you think, right? So not necessarily, but it's not against the rules to say, hey, what do you think, right? They're involved in it every day. So if you want to ask now, that's fine.
I guess I value your opinions. So, if you see something that we're really overlooking that you think as a board we need to focus on, or if you think we've missed the mark here in any way or hit the mark in any way, it'd be nice to know.
Well, thank you first for that ask and for the opportunity. And very much would like to hear from either Mr. Bisick or Ms. Trigley in terms of their contributions. But what I will say is the synergy I see between the board, to their point, and getting back to the basics. I think what you uncovered here are that, right? Getting back to our mission statement, getting back to good training for board members, to enhance education, and then taking a deeper look into bylaws and and ensuring that there's an understanding and clear output in terms of next steps with that. So that would be my take, and they all seem attainable, and I think there's value in them.
The point of always getting back to the why and giving purpose to whatever it is you're doing. You can never argue when you have solid ground in what you're doing and why you're doing it, and your intention is purposeful and meaningful. So I think what you have so far is totally in line, back to basics of why we do the things we do.
So I'd like to offer that as the year goes on, if there are things that you think the board needs to do better as a governing body, and you guys have already done this for us, is to feel free to me or to tell the individual board members can improve so that we can work together better. If we're not getting to you in emails promptly, or we're not responding in a certain way, or there's some lags in that sense, or even the way the meeting conducted, to feel free to, we don't have to stick to these are our board goals, but if there's stuff that you think we need to do better, please feel free to tell us. I'll add that I think this is a very non-defensive board, and we really all want what's best for the district.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Going to recommend that we start to think about this in the springtime, right around evaluation, and just give me a call, get on my schedule, and we'll have these conversations a little bit earlier. Give Dr. V and his team a little bit more time to plan for the opening of school, and we'll have ourselves on the right track.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Have a good night.
May I please have a motion to close the meeting?
Make a motion.
I'll second.
Have a good night, everybody.